today's webinar in case you want to share this with anyone else on your staff. Today's webinar has been designed to provide fundraising professionals with insight and best practices that can be incorporated into existing strategies to help increase both participation and revenue. Both myself and our guest speaker today currently work with nonprofits from very small to very large, like the United Way and Save the Children. So we're going to show you 3 specific case studies today from both a small and a large nonprofit. And it's our hope that you will gain some insight that can help you bring innovative ideas to your own strategies that can help you grow this year. So let's get started by briefly just looking at today's sponsors. So I'm going to go through these really quickly. Many of you on our webinar today have been invited to attend by one of these companies. Hardy Integrated Solutions in New Haven, Connecticut. Lithic Cell Marketing in Albuquerque, New Mexico. Foley Direct from Yorktown, New York. Fusion Corporate Services from the Chicagoland area. Blue Tape from San Antonio, Texas. Homes from Springfield, Ohio. And our newest sponsor, Sir Speedy Printing from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. And I am from the Digital Innovations Group, which is located in Richmond, Virginia. These companies all work with nonprofit organizations in their respective areas of the country and have banded together to share best practices and develop innovative strategies to help their clients grow participation and revenues. We have one guest speaker today. Unfortunately, Kim Gross was unable to be here due to a sick child. But we also have with us today Bill Nims, Vice President of Business Development with Hardy Integrated Solutions. And acting as our moderator today is Carissa Holmes-Peters from the Holmes Company in Springfield. Bill, just making sure that everybody can see our screen, we should be looking at the dashboard screen. Is that working?
Well, it's right at the very beginning showing our 3 pictures and what you had going live, so there you go.
Oh, okay.
Okay, now we're looking at the board screen, okay.
Okay, just making sure. Okay, so today we have muted all of the attendees just to keep the confusion to a minimum with our speakers, but that doesn't mean you can't ask your questions. So you can see on the screen right now, shows you the little GoToMeeting dashboard. You can type your questions in throughout the webinar, and Carissa will bring those to the attention of the speakers while we're going through the webinar, and we'll get you those answers. So let's go ahead and get started today. Here's the agenda that we've created for today. We're going to just kind of get our bearings with what's happening in fundraising today, the current state, look at some of the opportunities that exist, and then we'll take a look at those best practices and case studies. And as we always like to do, we're going to leave you with some next steps that you can actually start to look at your own organizations and put some of the things you're going to learn today into practice. So the objective is to share industry best practices and insight, get you thinking, and help drive improved results for 2013. Let's just look at the state of fundraising. You're probably all pretty familiar with this situation. Charitable giving compared to 2012 was relatively flat with a 1.7% growth overall. But you can see with small organizations, they actually had a much better year with slightly over 7.3% in growth. Medium organizations looked like, what was it, about 2.7%. And then for your very large organizations, only about a 0.3% growth in 2012 versus 2011. Religious giving grew by 6.1%. Educational giving was up just about 2%, and animal welfare and environmental causes also grew. However, giving to international affairs, healthcare, and human services organizations declined in 2012. So you're probably all pretty much aware of what that's meant to your organization and where you actually fall in that spectrum. Giving is also likely to remain flat. And so the focus for successful nonprofits is going to be looking at ways to achieve sustained growth in new donors. Also last year, it was basically a wash between the rate of new donors added and those that were lost at the same time. So it's going to be really important to look at ways to consistently bring new donors into the organization as well as maintain retention. So how to do that, it's going to be about improving relationships with your existing donors to drive increases in frequency of gifts and gift size as well as retention. Another big factor that's going to take place in 2013 is that more nonprofits are beginning to use mobile, cloud computing. They're really putting some of the aspects of, as we've all heard in quotes, big data into play in their organizations, and they're finally beginning to look at CRM and really use the richness of what's offered through various CRM platforms to improve those relationships with their donors. The new technology is going to help nonprofits develop a comprehensive overall understanding of all the ways that their supporters interact with organizations, and it's going to give them an ability to tailor their experience for donors across the entire platform or all of their channels. So really finally hitting the stride with getting the right message to the right donor at the right time and via the right channel. We're also seeing online giving growing, and that does depend on where you fall within the spectrum and size. But one thing that is important, and Blackbaud did a great study on this, is that online acquired donors have much higher cumulative value over the long haul than a traditional offline acquired or mail acquired donor. As long as you extend the relationship past online into the offline channel, it proves out to be the most successful case for both retention and growth of gift size. So here's what online giving looked like in 2012. Overall, it was up by 10.7%. Large organizations grew at 7.2%, medium-sized organizations grew at about 14.3%, and small nonprofits were sitting at just under 12% at 11.8% on a year-over-year basis. Online giving still represents less than 10% of the total fundraising revenue, but it definitely indicates, though, that organizations should be evaluating their online giving strategies and how it compares to their year-over-year performance.
Hey, Kate, we do have one question.
Came in.
Oh, we do? Okay.
Yeah, how do you convert online donors to offline donors?
Well, we're going to talk about that in the cases, but it's really looking at that overall relationship, how you're communicating with them, which channels you're using to communicate with them, and looking at it as more of a conversation rather than specific solicitations, which is typically the strategy with a lot of nonprofits. So we'll see some examples of that, but it really is done through the communications mix and looking and analyzing actually how that supporter is interacting with the organization.
Sorry,
all right,
Kate,
so now you got another one, Carissa?
Yeah, what characterizes a small, medium, and large nonprofit?
Oh, okay, that's a good question. Usually you see that very small nonprofits, and I kind of lumped them together for the purposes of this presentation, but you'll see like very small is typically expenditures under $250,000 a year. That small category is expenditures of somewhere between $250,000 and $1 million per year. Mediums usually look like $1 million to about $3 million, and large $3 million or more is how that breaks down.
Okay, thanks.
Okay. With the online, converting a donor who's come in via an online channel to offline as well, and here's what your retention statistics look like. So you can see that online converted to offline is the green bar there, and they have the highest retention rate. Online donors who stay online donors actually have the lowest retention rate, and offline donors have a retention rate of about 60%, and that comes from the DonorCentrics Internet Multi-Channel Giving Benchmarking report that was done by Blackbaud in 2011. Another big trend that you're likely to see, and maybe some of you are already seeing this or investigating that, human services organizations, which account for nearly 1/3 of all the public charities, are ending up hurting the most. And many are having to undergo painful restructuring, looking at mergers or collaborations or even cutbacks or ceasing to exist. In a recent study, 17% of nonprofits noted that they had an interest in merging, and 42% reported that they'd already participated in some type of interagency or cross-agency collaboration on specific initiatives. So basically, with all these things in mind, you kind of are faced with some options as an organization. You can continue with the same tactics that you have, hoping that things will get better in the future. You can look at reducing your spending to keep costs in line with declining revenues or flat revenues and hope that things get better in the future. Or you can do what we're hoping that you'll do today, which is take some action to increase the results by learning from others and incorporating their new ideas into your plan. So we're certainly hopeful that your attendance here at this webinar means that you've chosen number 3. So what we did was we looked at all the things that are going on in the nonprofit world and what the best practices are, and we looked at 3 key strategies that we think could be implemented by any type of nonprofit. And the first one was utilize your data better, and we're going to talk about things with ways to do that. And then we're going to talk about improving the relevancy of the messaging that you're using in terms of your content, your timing, and the channels that you're using, and really looking at that on an individual donor or prospect level and incorporating that into your strategy. And then finally, best practices for really communicating in a multi-channel environment or a cross-channel environment. And the difference there is multi-channel is basically the same message pushed out over all of your channels versus a cross-channel. I use the differing channels to continue the conversation, to build on the conversation with more and more relevant information. And that's really where you see the most opportunity. So let's look at one way of analyzing your data. So you could start with, here's some statistics from 2012 Chronicle of Philanthropy on the percentage of personal income that is normally given to nonprofits. So in that 50K to 100,000K range, it's an average of 6%. And you can see as the income grows, it comes down, sort of counterintuitive, so that the all income levels are sitting at just under 5% or 4.7%. So knowing what income bracket your customers are in could give you an indication as to whether or not customers but donors, give you an indication as to whether there's more opportunity for them to increase their gift with your organization. So the first key strategy is using research and analytics to more effectively target both donors and non-donors. And you're going to look at improving your segmentation based on demographic or life state data, behavioral, when they give, what type of typical things tend to engage them, and what their overall engagement levels look like, and also their attitudinal interests and priorities, and how you can build on that to create these lasting relationships. So one of the things that we uncovered in our research for today's webinar is that over 65% of highly effective organizations utilize a combination of this proactive prospecting techniques, including wealth screening, peer screening, and predictive modeling. And 23% of the organizations that do have at least some staff devoted to analytics and predictive modeling. Some of you are going to be small and not have the staff for that, but there are outside resources that can help you so that you can better use the data that you have today. Studies have shown that these techniques can, 17% of the well-screened constituents can typically be identified as new prospects. 19% eventually interact with the fundraising professional, and 10% of those contacts eventually result in a closed gift. So looking at your data a little bit more closely, maybe adding to it by appending some key elements can give you a much better picture of the opportunity that may exist within your existing donor base. Now let's look at what one nonprofit, the American Bible Society, was able to do. They took their existing donor list and compared that with publicly available data on those who were giving to nonprofits in general. It would have consisted of something like we saw in the previous slides. They would have known, roughly what the percentage of income typically given within the income bracket was. They also looked at their wealth wealth codes and the other markers that could help them identify who might be a likely prospect. And they were able to identify about 10% of their donors who had the ability to give more. And through that additional appended information. And then by doing that, they also now had a way of potentially being more relevant in their solicitations of this audience. They built a cloning model that allowed them to target more donors and new donors as well. And they also looked at, what can we ask these prospective donors and donors that goes beyond the typical thing that we would ask, and they classified that as a stretch ask. And it was specifically to see if they could grow gift size. And they integrated this campaign, and you're going to see that as a reoccurring theme throughout today's webinar, integrated both voice messaging, pre-campaign, emails that were going along with their direct mail, personalized contact from development officers, all into a consistent and integrated strategy to reach out to this donor base. In all 4 segments, the stretch offer had a higher average gift and higher response rate, and it brought in twice as much as their control group. So we'll just look at their segments, which were a general donor, which was current donors, but last gift was less than $100. What they considered to be an upper donor who had made a recent gift of somewhere between $100 and $500. A rising donor, which they classified as someone who had given between $500 and $1,000 cumulatively in one of the last 3 years. And then a rising prospect, that was a rising prospect, and then a rising donor was someone who had given somewhere between $1,000 and $10,000 cumulatively in one of the last 3 years. So you can see that by using this integrated communication strategy that combined direct mail, voice messaging, emails, they were able to really radically improve the results by segment. So you can see the upper donor went up by 156%, rising prospects by 144%, general donors by 134%, and even their rising donors at 104%. So across the board, they were significantly able to increase the amount of revenue coming in from those segments. So one of the things you want to ask yourself is, if we were to go ahead and apply some of that appended information that's available to our donor base, and then look at segments that we could target for additional for increasing the gift size, and then even model that data of what our current donor looks like and turning that into a way of reaching out to prospective donors who might be more likely to give to your organization. What kind of opportunity might exist for you if you were able to see those type of increases with your tactics this year. Okay. All right, so this brings me to engagement, which is key strategy number 2, which is we want to give donors relevant, speed, and brevity. So you want to think like Amazon and Netflix. People want to give to organizations that are personally relevant to them, and donors don't want to wait until next year to learn how their gift helped and what more they can do. So you want to think about how you can extend that relationship by using your communication methods to give them back the information that they're seeking to feel that their gift was valuable, that it did good work, and to understand what more is possible if they continue to give to the organization. If you can improve the relevancy of this information, you really are looking at a 3x lift between just personalizing and or making this content really relevant to their interests. And it can be relevant in a lot of different ways. So it can be relevant to the time of year that they give, what they're interested in, what aspects of your mission are they feel most closely related with. All of those things can help you drive relevancy in your communication. And the other thing you want to look at is that these are conversations and not campaigns. So you want to look at just engagement, not just whether they give or not, but track the engagement. And I like to look at that as both overt engagement and covert engagement. So overt is I've requested information, I've filled out a form, I've sent a check, I've requested information, I've volunteered for the organization. So they're overtly taking some type of action. But there's also covert things too. So you send them an email and they click on things and they read certain stories and they're interested in certain information. or you send them emails and they're looking a lot. So they're clicking on a lot of things. They're opening the information that you give them, whether electronic or in print, and they're asking for more information. Or even look at their social media activity. Are they talking about your organization? Are they interacting with you on social media? Because that gives you an indication that they're contemplating. They're engaged with your organization and contemplating making a gift. So obviously tracking the money is really critical, and we all spend a lot of time doing that. But you also want to think about devoting time to what those non-donors are doing and how they're engaged with your organization. Specifically young donors who make their first gift. This is just as important as maybe a major donor in the long term, but we tend to not have the manpower to focus on things like that. So looking at ways that you can actually interact with that first-time donor, reinforce that decision, and make them feel engaged with the organization. What are your SIBONT triggers and your LIBONT engagement levels? What seems to be driving their activity and their decision to give? And then you can take that learning and apply it to the rest of your communication strategy. So really it's a new definition of interaction. So are they opening emails? Are they clicking? Are they interacting, connecting, posting, promoting your organization using social media tools? Are they responding or seeking information from your direct mail solicitations? And are they volunteering where they can for your organization? It's really super important to steward your first-time donors. And I recommend, and I think we all would, who are taking part in this webinar, recommend that that is just as important as your major gift prospects. And so look at both those opportunities in the same light and figure out ways that you can communicate with those new donors at the same level of relevancy that you get with that one-on-one interaction that you get from major donors. So I'm going to, now unfortunately our guest speaker, which was Kim Gross from Pay Center Enterprises, and this was her best practice, and she was going to deliver this for you today, but as I mentioned, she has a sick child and wasn't able to attend today. So I'm going to take over the reins. Hopefully I'll do it justice, but if there are any questions about this case that I can't answer, we'll capture those questions and get Kim to get back to you with the answers. So basically Push the Rock and their annual fund, it's a small Christian sports ministry, and their annual fund, this case was for September 2011 through August 2012, and they have about 8,000 prospective donors on their database, and their budget, as you can see, is quite small at about $30,000. So the graphic here on this side of the page is typical solicitation. You can see letter, you've got some graphics on here, and your typical BRC at the bottom. So what initiated the relationship was their participation rate was stagnant. They had started to see declining revenue since the recession had started. So 2008, 9, 10 were not so great years for them. And they were really struggling with the manpower necessary to get their communication strategy, to execute their communication strategy. So let alone, that was just if everything was static, so let alone trying to create versioned pieces to appeal to their different segments. So they believed in the relevancy logics, but they just didn't have the manpower to do that. They weren't really making use of their electronic communication. They weren't capturing information from either their existing donors about why they were engaged or why they believed in the organization, and they weren't getting that information from prospective donors as well. With a variety of reasons to donate, because they have a pretty wide mission, there was little or no way to understand what brought a donor to the organization and why they were giving. So the program objectives were basically increase participation from those who they already knew about, increase gift amounts from past donors, develop and execute a fully branded cross-channel campaign that would focus on Push the Rock's mission and allow them to figure out what was the components of that mission that each individual donor identified with. So they wanted to also streamline the overall fundraising process because of this small staff and make it as effective as they could, so that they could manage their human capital as responsibly as possible. And during this process, they were going to try to collect relevant information from all of those constituents so that they could utilize that in subsequent years to grow gifts. So the campaign that PaceSetter developed included 4 solicitation pieces, a variable direct mail piece, which was in one phase of the operation, 2 corresponding emails that went along with that. It included personalized landing pages to give them tracking and ways to interact with the donor, and they also included 2 holiday emails into the communication piece that went out to everyone. So it started by, just as we saw in the American Bible Society, looking at their donor database and segmenting in that into those who had donated and made pledges in the past and those that did not donate, and those who were not engaged with the organization currently were going to get a direct mail piece, and that was going to include a business reply envelope and ways to either donate or make a pledge. From the direct mail page, the direct mail piece, they would also have a call to action that invited them to visit a personalized landing page where they could take a survey, which would help the organization understand a little bit more about the donor's motivations, and they could from that also make a donation or make a pledge. Now from that, you're going to have some people that take no action at all. And if that were the case, then they would go into phase 1 emails and receive emails in both phase 1 and phase 2 and hopefully react as a result of those emails, which gave them a way to also capture some of that donor motivation as well. And of course, you're going to have people that don't donate, and those guys would enter into phase 3 as non-donors. You would also have people that would go to visit the landing page but not completely convert, so not take the survey. So those two would also, people who did that would continue to be interacted with using email in subsequent phases of the campaign. And again, you'd have people who donate out of that and people who don't donate, and those that don't would enter into phase 2, and those that did would go into the next phase of the communication. So here's an example of a variable data direct mail piece that went out. It's got variable text based on the donor status. It's got variable text based on their affiliation, what was known or what they could infer from past data interactions that they captured. And then they were invited to visit their personalized landing page to interact more with the organization or make a gift. On the direct mail piece, there was a BRC, and it looked like this. It included the donor contact information. It included a variable ask amount depending on their past relationship. Supporting emails look like this, so they were built to reinforce the message that came out in the direct mail piece, or they were standalone if the donor was a current donor, active donor, and interacting via email. Included the personalization, included the donor's name, had variable copy based on what they could assume about the donor's interests and affiliations, and then also invited them to visit their own personalized landing page. Here's an example of the personalized landing page. You can see that, again, that is personalized. Makes sense. And also, they would also get either a donate today or some other message based on where they were in the cycle. Variable copy on each of these emails. So here's the end result of that. They were able to increase the dollars raised over 2011 by 26%, which was very huge for them. They also had a 27% increase in donors compared to 2011. Their ROI was 362%. So the cost to raise $1 was 21 cents. So great ROI on that. And they're a very small nonprofit. So that gives you an example of how these cases can be applied, or these best practices can be applied to small organizations to get big results. So what they did to just kind of break that down, and this will be something that you can...
Quick question here.
Yes?
You discussed several of the components that went into this. Do you have any feel for what the best mix might be?
You know, that you see that all over the place. I think it depends on the organization. It depends on the donor. So the key there is to use a strategy that allows you to track what they're responding to, and develop what you believe to be the best control on what's getting the actions that you want, and then continue to monitor that and make it better. So there's actually a really good presentation out on the internet that Blackbaud did, and they looked at several organizations and what those mixes look like, and they're really completely different for each organization. But they did consistently use offline and online channels to drive the message home, but the mix of how much they used depended on how that donor was interacting with the organization. I have a colleague that calls it resuscitating. So if, for instance, if a donor is interacting via electronic channels and they're doing great, but then all of a sudden you're tracking and you realize they're not interacting as well, then that's a nice time to integrate some direct mail back into it as sort of get them back on board and communicating and interacting again. So it's tough to answer, Bill. It's really all over the place. The best thing to do is map out your strategy using best practices, the ones that you can find that closely align with your organization, and then build in that you can track what's happening and look for aberrations in behaviors, and then react to that.
Okay.
So here's some things that Kim looked at, what time of year they had typically given, how often they gave, how much they gave, and how they like to give, either through the BRC or an online channel. They didn't send a solicitation to every donor every time, which is kind of radical. They really looked at using electronic channels to communicate when it was not a typical time that donor gave, and use those interactions to give them more information and keep them up to speed on what was happening and what their gift was doing. And then they would use the solicitation at a time of year when that donor had given in the past. So make sure that you're analyzing giving trends. The organizations that had the most success here had two key points. Approximately 33% of all the gifts were received during the month of December, and the second largest time for gifts is at the end of the organization's fiscal year, because that's typically when we do a large push. So, look at what it is. Is that what you're seeing? Do you see something differently? Are there people that are outside that pattern? And that can be one of your levels of segmentation. And then but during those two key times, you want to make sure that you're definitely soliciting everyone who hasn't given yet at those two times, and the people that have given at those times. They also started by looking at what their past pieces had looked like, and repurposing as much of the messaging as they could to keep the creative costs down. And that is actually a really good best practice. So you can actually look at each component of your creative as like basically little zones, and reuse the zones in different channels and at different chimes in your printed communication. So they were looking to identify the elements of their brand and really get a handle on what was working, what wasn't working. They were able to streamline the fundraising process by eliminating unnecessary outbound pieces, which kept the cost down, and allowed them to integrate, different types of communication into the mix. The necessary steps here was have them outline their entire fiscal year at the beginning, and then look at when and how they would communicate, and then they could watch what was happening and what results they were getting, and they could respond accordingly. They integrated web technology using video elements to get the attention of donors. We know that audio and video have a much larger impact on your audience, so integrating that into both your direct marketing campaigns as well as social media is a key element for driving response. And they focused on emails to consistently communicate with donors and prospective donors, specifically with that information about how the organization was doing, what current gifts were helping the organization to be able to do, and what additional needs existed for the organization. Monitoring your engagement levels should be able to tell you who should be giving, who's not responding to your messaging, and so you can switch it up. where to focus as you get near the end of your cycle. Those people that appear to be considering a gift that you can push over the finish line at the end of your year, and when certain channels are more effective. And by this point, by analyzing what they're clicking on, what they're asking for, what their information they're providing, you should be able to identify what is the key messaging to focus on in order to get them to convert. You want to grow, so basically using these cross-channel approaches to deepen that relationship and learn as much as you can about that donor and their motivation and how they feel about their organization is the key best practice. And now, because I could use a little sip of water, I'm going to turn it over to Bill, and Bill is going to take you through a unique approach that they've developed for Save the Children. Bill, take it away.
Okay, thank you, Kate. Save the Children for the last several years has a fall catalog that they call a fall gift catalog, and they offer several things. But basically, it's to be able to give a holiday gift in the name of someone else. They came across this as another revenue stream that they could generate by someone not just only donating to their organization, but giving a gift to the organization in the name of someone else, and so it sort of doubled up as a gift for that other person as well. They had some problems in dealing with how the system was working. It was presenting quite a burden on their own internal staff to help implement it. There was an outside fulfillment house, but then there were problems in the communication link between them as to the status of orders, getting them out on a timely basis, and understanding where everything stood. So it was quite a burden on their part for the system every fall. Okay, next slide. So what they wanted to do was set up a new fulfillment system that relieved a lot of this burden, that it would be more of an automated process, and they would be able to submit the orders to us, and we would process the orders, and based on all the criteria set, we would be able to send out a personalized gift receipt card to the person that the gift was given in the name of. And this process allowed the sender or the donor to actually personalize a salutation. Show you an example of what the card looks like in a minute, but they could personalize the salutation and actually put a personal closing at the end of the card, so it would seem that it was more personalized for the recipient. In addition, there were premiums based on the level of gift that was given, that we warehoused some premiums for them, and if a person qualified for that, they could select the premium, and which was part of the order, and we would be able to send out that premium along with the personalized gift card. So in addition to be able to process these orders and send out the personalized card, they wanted to have an inventory control system that they could look at and monitor what was going on these particular orders that they were submitting to us, and knowing what the status was of these orders at any given point in time, and make sure the orders were out on a timely basis, which they had to be sent out within a 2 business day time frame. We also provided them with an inquiry system, an online inquiry system, to be able to go in and take a look at a given order if a customer service person had a question as to whether or not the card had been sent out because perhaps the recipient hadn't received it. What the system allowed them to do is, let's say perhaps the recipient's address was incorrect. It was input incorrectly and some error was there. So they could go in and they could see that, they could correct it right online, and the system would automatically resubmit the order to go back through so the next day that the card would go out. And if we got too low on inventory items for those premiums, someone would automatically be alerted that we had hit the reorder point, and then they could order new premiums so that they could be sent here so we would not run out of product. Okay, next slide. The results of this was Everything got implemented on a timely basis, and the implementation was very smooth. A couple wrinkles perhaps relative to data format, which they were able to square away on their end, and we processed over 21,000 orders during the holiday season. And they felt as though the results of this was that it totally relieved their burden during this period of time, that they didn't have to worry about getting any of these cards out, and they had very easy inquiry into our system to be able to find out whenever there were any questions or problems that the donors relayed to them. And they looked at this whole system now as they viewed us as a partner, because we were able to help them to recommend components of the system that would ease the burden on them. And as a result, what they did is they are expanding the system now, and we actually just went live with a spring catalog. This went so well for them that what they did was they decided that there were other occasions throughout the year that people could make a gift in the name of someone else. So all the typical occasions that you can think of, Mother's Day, Father's Day, birthdays, in memory of, things such as that, or just a general, just decided to give a gift in your name, and so there was a general type of gift in that. But they had about 8 or 9 new occasions that they have put in their spring catalog, and they had predetermined text that they wanted to say in this. And once again, we have a card that would allow for personalized salutation and closing. So we were able to provide this ability to them to extend this type of additional revenue stream in the gift in someone else's name for them, and they're very excited about the prospects going into this year, because they can significantly increase this channel of donation. I can show you what some of typically what a card looked like. That the cover of the card in this case for the holiday season was fixed, but when we now are implementing the spring catalog, the cover can change depending on the particular subject matter for the card. But here was the card that we use. In the next slide, on the left inside, depending on the gift that they gave, there was a variable image that had something to do with the gift that they gave. They would donate a goat or a sheep or things like this to someone in another country, and in honor of that, we would have a variable image that we would select that would show some relevance to the type of gift that was given in their name. The next slide shows another version of that they could give, so to show that there was they were able to give a couple of different types of gifts. They could do 6 months worth of cards, 6 months worth of donations, and here was an example of that each month we would send a personalized card indicating a gift stream that they had donated in the name of that person. So that just shows that you could have it just shows another variable image that we put on the inside of the card. The next slide shows the text.
Do we have a question on that one, Bill?
Excuse me?
We have a question on that.
Oh, okay.
So we're so when they kicked off, a series of cards that would go out, periodically,
Right.
was Save the Children receiving all that revenue at that moment?
They received it all up front.
Great.
So
okay.
someone could donate something that would be a stream for 6 months or 12 months, and we had to store that data so that we would select it. I think it's like the 15th of every month. We would select each monthly gift in sequence. They designated what those 6 gifts were, or the 12 gifts. So they were fixed cards that we sent, but we personalized each one as we sent it out. So it could be a whole revenue stream. So these were for obviously much larger gifts that people gave.
Okay.
So here's an example of what the card looked like. I mean, this is a very simple use of the salutation and in the closing. It could get more elaborate. We allow a lot more characters than that, but that was basically the card that we sent out. The next slide shows a special version of that basically it's the same card, only it says Happy Hanukkah at the end. That this was a very interesting situation that once Hanukkah was approaching, a very good donor for them asked if we could change that card to say Happy Hanukkah. So because of the way the system is set up, we just very quickly created another template with the text saying Happy Hanukkah rather than Happy Holidays. And we sent it out to a whole series of people that this donor, Debbie, obviously, had made. And as a result of that, when Christmas came shortly after Hanukkah, she sent out another whole stream of cards saying Happy Holidays. So when you can accommodate someone like this, a donor like this, and have a system set up that is very flexible, it took the burden completely off them, because normally they would have had to have done something very, very special internally to make this happen, but they would have tried to accommodate a good donor like this. Whereas the way we had the system set up, it was very easy to accommodate this request and for this particular donor. And the back of the card was a fixed image as well. But this, all the front and the back, even though we're fixed for the holidays, these are changing now with the spring catalog, that the front and back are also variable content on the card. So depending on the occasion, they can say what they want on the front and the back. The next slide shows just a screenshot of their online order inquiry capability, and being able to look at the inventory as well. So it just shows some of the things that they could do here, and it shows that you could click on that button that's highlighted there saying search for order. So they could key that in and key someone's name, and we would go find an order with that person's name and show it on the screen, and they could see whether it was shipped or not. And if it was and the person hadn't received it, they could probably identify that perhaps there was an addressing problem or what have you. So the system did work out very well for them, and they were very pleased, and obviously that's why they're expanding with their spring catalog.
Now, Bill, I have a question for you. I know that you've been, not all nonprofits use this sort of giving as a gift approach. Yeah. And you've been taking this idea to a number of nonprofits that currently weren't doing that. How receptive have they been, and what opportunity they see in creating a revenue stream that looks like that, using this type of a tool?
Oh, that's a good question. And based on this concept that we did with Save the Children, it did open our eyes as to this other revenue stream that's basically available to all nonprofits. And it's not something new. Most every nonprofit we talk to will take a donation as for a gift in someone else's name. But the problem that they encounter is how they handle it. It's all manually. So even though it's a nice revenue stream, it's the more successful they are with it, that the more burden it puts on their already taxed staff that they have. So most nonprofits do live on a tight budget, and so it's hard to bring additional burden on them. So the idea that we're working on with several of the smaller nonprofits now is to make a very simple gift-giving online system, and basically it's totally hands-off from the nonprofit, and it will accept a donation automatically on the system, and put the money into the nonprofit organization's account, and we will send out the personalized thank you and the personalized card to the recipient of the gift. All this is done by a very simple database-driven system that's set up so that it has to be done so that it's relatively easy to set up, it's not very costly to run, and there's a very significant return on this small investment from the nonprofit that basically everybody that donates a gift in someone else's name, it just puts money into the account of the organization and doesn't require additional work on their part. And the only thing they have to do is any of the marketing that is done, they just have to promote this avenue or this channel of making a donation in the gift in someone else's name.
Well, Bill, it also, one of the things that strikes me, and I don't think you mentioned it, but you're almost creating a sort of a self-perpetuating prospect pool, you know, perhaps from the people that the gifts are given for or given to.
Right. We basically, we do capture all the names, so yes, all that data is returned to the nonprofit, not only who donated and so that they could update their records, but who the donation was made in the name of. So the nonprofits are excited to know that now these can be added to their prospect base because now they have a link to the organization so that they can then start showing telling these people how the money is being used for that organization and seeing if they can expand that so that now the recipient can become a donor.
Okay. Thank you so much, Bill. Carissa, do we have any other questions come in?
There was one final question here. Bill, what would you say is the key takeaway from this system?
Well, I think to some degree I answered it with Kate, but it has to be something that is a very simple, low-cost system that does not really burden the organization's staff at all, and just is a perpetual income stream for them as people donate the gifts.
Okay. No, there was no other question.
Okay, thanks, Carissa. Okay, so let's summarize today what we've talked about. Key things that you want to investigate your current strategy for is what more can you do with your data. By appending information to your existing data, can you get a better picture of what the opportunity is for, to grow gift size or to target donors, potential donors that have the same characteristics as your current donors. So that's one key takeaway. A second key takeaway is look at what you're doing today, and are you making those channels work together, or are they just siloed individual messages going out via your different channels? Because really what you want to do is look at what Kim did with Push the Rock, and can you continue that conversation by integrating additional channels into the mix. So if you start the conversation by sending a direct mail piece to the donor, prospective donor, and you ask them to interact, visit the landing page, strategically place links on that page that will help you understand in a covert fashion what your donor or your prospect seems to be interested in, or even in an overt fashion by asking them specifically what's drawn them to your organization and what they think is important about your mission, and then turning around and using that information to turn that into relevant messaging when you go back out to them. Share with them first what your strides have been in those areas that they're most interested in. You can always have a for more information button and they can get the rest of the story, but lead with what's most important to them as a way of capturing their attention and drawing them into a conversation. And so look at both those overt opportunities to learn from your donors and then the covert opportunities as well by giving them different things to click on, and then looking at what that data is on the back end and what it tells you about what their interests are. And lastly, as Bill showed you with the gift giving system, is there something out there that you just haven't thought of before that you could integrate into your mix and use that to drive additional revenue for the organization, but you look at turning it into something that can be automated so it isn't a draw on the resources of your organization, but allows you to interact in a different level with your donors and prospective donors. So today, following the webinar, you're going to be contacted by whichever company who sponsored us today, who invited you. The slides will be made available as well as the recording. We hope that everyone learned something today and has some things to think about as they go back to their desks and start to ponder the remainder of 2013. Thanks again for attending, and we look forward to seeing you on a future webinar.